Ladies and gentlemen, please find some seats. Ladies and gentlemen, please find some seats. The show will be beginning shortly. Find some seats. Ladies and gentlemen, please find some seats. The show will be beginning shortly. Ladies and gentlemen, please find some seats. The show will be starting momentarily. Ladies and gentlemen, find some seats, please.
Hello, everybody. If you could move to your seats, get comfortable. People could find their way in, make themselves comfortable. We're going to get started momentarily. People can take their seats. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, fellow directors, past presidents, members, and guests. Welcome to the 116th season of the Empire Club of Canada. I'm really glad to welcome you all here. For the non-conservatives in the crowd who walked over the threshold of the Albany Club and did not combust, welcome to you. I'm really excited for tonight's evening when we're going to look at Election 43, a deep dive into everything that happened over the course of that election. I now call this meeting to order. What I know to be true is that we couldn't host these events if we didn't have great sponsors, and it's because of their generous support that we're able to have you all out here this evening. So I'd like to acknowledge the Greater Toronto Airports Authority. Here we are. I'd like to, let's hear it for Spirits Canada and Bell Canada. Thank you very much. MediaEvents.ca is webcasting our event, and we thank our media partner, the National Post. What you're all participating in is called Empire Nights. These are events that we're having with increasing frequency. They become more and more a staple of the club. The formula in many ways is pretty simple. Bring people out, have a chance to network, share some food and a drink, then put some smart people on the stage to talk about a topic we all care about. And I'll remind you, then there's a chance afterwards to stick around and talk and unpack a little bit more of what has been said. Look, follow on the website. You'll see more and more of these events, and I hope you'll agree that they're a great way to get into topics that are of importance. So with that, let me do what I should do and get out of the way, but first to introduce our guests. It was an election. We know what happened on Election Day. We know how Canadians decided, but tonight's really about getting some insights to the people who are in the campaign war rooms, who are in the campaign HQ, to understand a little bit about the twists and turns and whether they thought about it at the moment, a little bit about their perspective on the way into the election, and of course, maybe they'll share some insights as to how they're looking at it now that we're past it. So, let me introduce them. First, up from the Liberal Party, Campaign Manager Jeremy Broadhurst. Second up, a good friend from the Conservative Party, Hamish Marshall. Next, we have from the NDP, strategist Michael Balagus. And to take care of this crowd, from Global Public Affairs, Tom Clark.
Good evening. How are you? I think the bar stays open, so if any of us get sort of long and boring, you just go back there. Yeah, nobody did there was no combustion that happened. But I just want everybody to take a moment and just have John A. MacDonald looking down on Mike Balagus and Jeremy Broders. That doesn't happen all that often. That's kind of fun. So I just want to say a couple of things to get going, and let me state the obvious, and that is that all of us up here, we're all a bunch of losers. Well, for two reasons. One is because on a political level, and we'll get into this, but maybe, nobody scored a real victory out of this campaign. And then the second reason is because, frankly, take a look at us. 4 white guys sitting up here talking about politics. In fairness, Mike, you're sort of a stand-in.
I am.
For Jennifer Howard.
That's right.
Right? Okay, so kind of second best, but that's all we could do.
Story of my life.
Yeah. So anyway, all that aside, but I felt that let's state the obvious right at the beginning. Let's get into this because this will be fun. I want to start on something that's counterintuitive, that is not part of the narrative that we've been through for the past couple of months on the campaign, and I want you to say something nice about your opponents. And can I put it in these terms? You're the top strategist, you're advising top strategists in your case, Michael, but if there was one thing during that campaign where you looked across at what your opponent did and you quietly said to yourself, oh wow, that was really good. Either a move that they made that was surprising good or that you admired. Was there such a thing, and if so, what would it be? And let me start with you, Mike.
There was, and it was very good, although it was not a surprise, and that was when our Liberal colleagues trotted out strategic voting in Ontario, and you kind of go, there it is, the card's played, and it's a good card. It works, and worked effectively.
That doesn't exactly sound like a nice thing to say, but anyway.
I'm doing my best.
Okay, well.
I'm doing my best. I'm sure they were tempted not to do the strategic voting thing, but came there.
Okay. Hamish, let's try with you.
Well, I think Mr. Singh's performance in the English language debate, the one that Trudeau actually turned up to, was very good. I thought I was impressed with his performance. I thought when he did Mr. Delay and Mr. Deny, I thought that was a very effective way of doing Liberal-Tory, same old story, which is the only way the NDP ever really can gain. Didn't pan out as well on Election Day, but I thought his performance was impressive.
Okay. Jeremy Broders, you can pretty well say anything you want to say, considering what the answers have been so far.
Well, I'm going to start by saying, coming to the Albany Club and being introduced as a loser is almost exactly how I imagine going to the Albany Club would be. So it's playing true to form at the moment. I'll say a couple nice things, actually. And I'll start by saying, when you run these campaigns, really what you're doing is you're making decisions about how to spend scarce resources, right? Whether it's money or the leader's time or personnel or whatever it is. And so I'll start by saying on the NDP front, it was impressive to see a campaign run probably spending a little bit more than a third of what the other campaigns spend. But we ran a campaign that was felt and looked like a national campaign, right? And it was, I can only imagine how hard it is to marshal resources in that kind of way, and that's impressive, and that should be commended to a certain extent. And to Hamish, I'd say, it is not nothing to get 6 million votes in this country.
6.2.
6.2 is, and I think we do have to sort of acknowledge that a lot of work was put in by all of the campaigns, and in a way, it's easy to say everybody lost, but in also in a way to say like there were successes all around, and these are hard events. These are hard things to go through, and you start off and you want to win 338 seats, right? And every one that you don't win hurts along the way. But I don't think at the end of the day, I was listening to a podcast recently of Matt Damon, Source of All Knowledge and Wisdom, and he said he was being asked about the difference between a good movie and a bad movie, and he's like, in the bad movie, it doesn't feel like you've worked any less hard, right? Like you do all the same stuff, it just doesn't come together sometimes. I've been on bad campaigns. I've served through many losing Liberal campaigns, and you work just as hard on the ones that you lose as the ones that you win. And I think it's important to remember that, right? That it's not always going to come down to like, well, that campaign was lazy, so therefore they lost, right? Like it's hard work all the way around, and I think all the campaigns showed it.
So let me turn it around a little bit and ask each of you again that, when I said, obviously it was a bit flippant to say that all these parties lost, but in a way they did, because they didn't meet their goal. In retrospect, and strictly between us, was there one thing that you could have done that would have changed the results to be more favorable in your direction? Mike? Yeah. Yeah.
A do-over on the 6-year run-up to the election would have been nice. I think for us, that was without a doubt our biggest challenge. When I look at the campaign itself, and I thank my colleagues for the compliments, not meeting a goal, I can tell you inside this room, when we were looking at polling that I'm sure you guys were looking at, we were staring down loss of party status the day the writ dropped. There was absolutely no question about that.
I had you at 9 seats in my own little log.
There you go.
Yeah.
And I tried to convince people that if everything went well and perfect and the other guys didn't do as great as they usually do and we do better than we usually do, we might get 25 seats. And so we kind of landed at the high end of what our opportunity was, although there was a point in the campaign where there was more opportunity there than we thought. But I think that for us, there's no question the big do-over was the 6-year run-up to the campaign. It was not a good 6 years for our party. We didn't raise money. We had divisions in the party that I think people are aware of. And a big takeaway lesson on that is what you do between elections matters as much or more than what you do during elections. And I think that was a hard lesson for us. And
just so we're not, go ahead.
And especially in this campaign, and I say this as nonpartisanly as possible, if I look at the opportunity that was on the table, a third of Canadians couldn't bring themselves to vote Conservative this time. A third of Canadians had trouble voting Liberal this time, and there was actually a bit of a window for us, and we gassed it.
Was that like you were on a breakaway and you couldn't put the puck in the net? No, sorry, that's another party. Excuse me, I mixed it up.
We had trouble getting off the bench.
Just so we're not completely symmetrical, Jeremy, why don't you take it, and then we'll come back to Hamish.
I have learned that you should pay really close attention to where the bus is in relation to the airplane. These are skills they don't teach you in campaign manager school. Sometimes, but it is, I mean, look, if you're doing one of these things and you don't have 6 regrets by noon, you're probably not doing enough, right? And you hit these moments and the bus runs into the wing of the plane and you gotta recover, right? Like you have to sort of say, all right, well, we can sit here and lament and point fingers about who's to blame for that one, or you start figuring out how you're going to move the tour on and get moving after that point. So it's, believe me, I could give you a list as long as my arm, but I think the more important thing is like, it's the recovery of those moments and how you move on. And yeah, we had a few moments in this campaign where we had to have some recovery and
I might suggest to you that the bus hitting the wing was the least of your problem.
It was just the first part.
Hamish, why don't you jump in?
The one thing that we struggled to get right before the campaign, and it got better in the campaign, but never quite to the point where I would have liked it, was we were never fast enough at hitting back. We've moved to, people talk about 24-hour media cycle, and it's really probably about an 8-hour media cycle now. There's probably 2.5 to 3 media cycles a day. And we were consistently, in some cases, 4 or 5 or 6 hours behind, which, 10 years ago would have been okay in a 24-hour news cycle, but it ultimately was something that we never quite figured out perfectly. And if I was going back and doing it again, I mean, look, the most important thing everybody needs to know about elections, and I'm sure the others will agree, is there's no silver bullets. You don't win for one reason, you don't lose for one reason. There's 100 different things intersecting. But if I was going back on one thing, I would have nailed down and got that capacity to deal with stuff faster, punch back harder and faster, figure that out earlier, because it was something that we never We got better, but we never got to where it needed to be.
So you bring up an interesting point, and let's talk about it now. The idea of hitting back and being fast with the counter punch or maybe the punch. A lot of Canadians walked out of this campaign experience feeling disappointed and in many cases angry. It became a very nasty campaign, and I'm not romanticizing the past. I've been around a few campaigns stretching back decades that were nasty and so on, but this one seemed to have a particular tinge to it that seemed to really bother a lot of people. I don't know if you felt that in your war rooms and in your planning, whether you personally felt that this was getting a little too personal, a little bit too much about the leaders and not enough about the substance. Is that just, am I just being too romantic out here about that, or what?
So just on that, I think the biggest disappointment, and I know it's cliche for a Tory to blame the media, but the biggest disappointment for me in the campaign, I met with all the bureau chiefs and the editors over the course of the summer, and they all said, we're going to focus on the issues, we're going to talk about what matters to Canadians, and actually, full credit, I think CBC probably did the best job of that, which is, again, heresy from a Tory, but...
At the Albany.
So you won't cut their funding.
Yeah, exactly. Sir John A. is going to strike me down, but the weirdest thing happened. So normally what happens in a campaign is, one of our leaders gets up, does an announcement, 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning, announcing great policy X, and then the other leader's doing an announcement 90 minutes later, 2 hours later, and they get a whole bunch of questions about whatever we just announced. So there's an incentive to get your announcement out first in the morning, so hopefully it will dominate the news cycle. This campaign was really bizarre in that the media weren't asking the leaders about what the other ones were announcing. So what ended up happening is we, about 3 weeks into the campaign, said, well, why are we getting everybody up at 5 in the morning to do an event at 8? Let everybody sleep in for a bit more. Let's do the event at 11. If we're not going to get the question, if they're not going to ask Trudeau about whatever we announced, why bother dragging everybody out of bed earlier than we have to? And I'll give you some examples. So Mr. Scheer took over 700 questions in the campaign from the media. He didn't get a single one on the Prime Minister's pledge to take Canada to net zero in 2050. Now, we can have a debate of whether it's good policy or bad policy or if there's a plan or not. Just putting that aside, that's a big, important announcement. It's important to your campaign. It is, from my perspective, irresponsible that no one ever thought to ask the leader of the opposition or the person who was tied in the polls that. I don't know if the Prime Minister ever got a question about a whole variety of our RESP, a 50% increase in the RESP. I don't think he ever did. And those are big, exciting policy things that all of our policy teams spent a lot of time working on, that we think we all spent a lot of money advertising it to Canadians. And it seemed very weird to me that the media just never even asked the questions. Like, it was like there was different campaigns. Usually what happens, and you've been on buses, Tom, is something happens on the Liberal bus, and you say, well, let's call our colleague at the network on this Tory bus and ask a question about whatever it is that happened. And the questions were never, ever about the policy. So I found that frustrating, and like I said, we just started pushing our events later in the day because there was the only thing we did when getting everybody up early was getting them grumpy. So that I found disappointing, and what they decided to fill the void with was lots of attacks, and we all participated in that. I'm not going to say we didn't. Of course we all did. But that decision to take policy off really was when we're not getting questions on it, why are we going to talk about it all the time, right?
How do you feel, Jeremy?
So, look, I would start by saying Canadians have this way of deciding what's important to them on these things. And you put out the platform, and you put out the policy pieces, and you do want people to engage with it and stuff. But also, a lot of what got characterized as nasty in this campaign was talking about judgment, and it was talking about the teams, and it was talking about how somebody was going to govern. In 2015, no one asked the question, what are you going to do if Donald Trump is going to be elected president of the United States, right? But I think Canadians intuitively know that these campaigns are more than just, let's measure up the platforms and decide which one we like best, because there are these huge unknowns that you're facing. And there's also just the question of how are the different leaders, and really it does come down to the leaders' log, going to deal with these issues that I care about, whether or not they're listed in the platform. And let's be really blunt here that a lot of the stuff, particularly early on, was about a social conservative agenda, that we were pointing out to people that you cannot sleep on this one. That if you cared about abortion rights, and if you cared about same-sex marriage and equality rights, that we needed to talk about it. We needed to talk about the people who are on offer across the country as candidates. And so, yeah, those became the questions because people were engaged with that topic. They see what's happening around the world, they see what's happening in other jurisdictions, and they knew that it was a real topic. There was some stuff that got into the realm of personal, but in most cases, it was about judgment. It was about how are people, you are asking for something sacred from people. You are asking for this ability not just to like implement your platform, but to deal with everything that comes forward. And then therefore everything's fair game at that point.
Mike, I want to go to you in a second, but to focus up this discussion a little bit, while I say that there have been nasty campaigns in the past, I did not see a campaign in the past that peddled in rumors the way this one did. The Buffalo Chronicle, the press release, Hamish, that you put out, saying Justin Trudeau's got to come clean about that thing in Vancouver. That is a level that I had never seen before, and I covered my first campaign in 1972. So while I appreciate what both of you are saying, I think that there are new levels here that we've got to explore, but let's mention one of the clear ones. And Mike, when you woke up that morning and saw that Time magazine had the picture of the Prime Minister in blackface, did you at that point say, Jagmeet Singh, we've got to start measuring the drapes at 24 Sussex? I mean, it's closed, but yeah.
No, we didn't, although we did look at it and thought that it would be a turning point in the campaign. And we believed that a grown man of some 30-odd years with one of the best educations money can buy, who was raised in the home of Pierre Elliott Trudeau, the man who brought us the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, was teaching in an elite school, and at a time when blackface was big. This was when Whoopi Goldberg and Ted Dawson, where that whole debate was going on. And watching the first apology, quite frankly, was embarrassing. I mean, and that's when we really thought things would change, when we watched his apology and it was clear he didn't get it. And the idea that a grown man could stand and say, I had no idea that all those circumstances, that there might have been something a little off here. And for us, it was not believable. Day two's apology, once people had a chance to craft it and get it ready and realized how bad the one on the airplane was, that started to move the dial a bit. But it also moved the dial. I'd like to think that Jagmeet's statement that night helped force that dial to be moved. And that was not a drafted statement. In fact, he had, if you remember, he was actually on a stage, I can't remember where, it was Sudbury or something, at a town hall when this broke. And someone shoved a microphone in his face and said, what do you think of the Prime Minister in blackface? It's like, so he kind of gave an initial, not knowing what the hell was going on. And by the time he got back to the office and I was with him, like his phone was lighting up with people saying, you got to say something. Mm-hmm. There are people out there, particularly kids out there, that need to hear from you.
But were you as equally surprised that it didn't become the thing that turned the campaign inside out?
I don't know if surprise is the right word. I think there was I don't know if it would have been appropriate to turn it inside out, but I think how quickly, and the second part of this that we found, and I'm being frank, and we found particularly upsetting, was when the pressure started to mount that, Jagmeet, you have to accept that apology or you'll look like you're playing politics. That the brown guy had to make the Prime Minister feel good about himself and accept the apology or he was playing politics.
But so, isn't that what you're supposed to do in a campaign?
Play politics?
Play politics?
Well,
I think by definition, that's
with
what
some
you're supposed
issues
to do.
you are.
Yeah.
Jagmeet would not play politics with that issue, no matter if you asked him to play politics. And in fact, he made it very clear to the Prime Minister's office, I don't want an apology because I don't want to set this up. I don't want to play politics with this. I don't want to reject your apology, so please don't offer me one.
Right. And obviously I want to hear from Jeremy, but Hamish, jump in.
Well, my first reaction was it's too soon. Right? The fundamental thing about Justin Trudeau is he's the single most polarizing politician I've ever seen in my life. And I think it was actually a conversation I had with you, Michael, at one of those things we did at the CPC, where the problem is that if you really, in your bones, hate Justin Trudeau, like just in your bones, you're probably already voting Conservative. Like it's already there. The people, Green voters and NDP voters, they don't love him, but they don't really dislike him either. They're kind of fond of him. They kind of like some of the stuff he's trying to do. They don't like how he does it. They don't like all the corruption. They don't like a bunch of the stuff. But if you really, really, really hate him, you're already voting for us. And I knew that there was a reservoir of sympathy amongst, like our voters would all be outraged, et cetera, but I knew there was a reservoir of sympathy amongst both Liberal voters who like him and give him the benefit of the doubt, but also amongst NDP and Green voters. So my reaction was that, well, this is too soon. Like we knew time was going to break it a few hours before it did. As has been publicly reported, the video that Global released, we'd given to Global before. We'd had it. We knew that blackface was a thing. And our reaction was, this is simply too soon.
So you would plan to release the blackface all along?
We were going to release it. We had a video that someone had said, we believe this is Justin Trudeau, and we gave it to a responsible media organization to vet it, to determine if
But how long, just a matter of interest, how long did you have that video for?
I'm not going to say everything.
Okay. I think we know.
But I'd heard the rumors of the yearbooks for ages and spent some time looking for them, only to discover after about 2 days later that one of our candidates was like, oh, my sister was at the school that time. Here's all the yearbooks. Thank you. The point is that reaction, we knew there was this reservoir of goodwill for the Prime Minister, and we knew that given time, he would be able to slide out of it. And I think there was the difference if that had happened towards the end of the campaign as opposed to in the beginning, have a significant impact on the results.
Jeremy, as I said, I've covered a lot of campaigns. I can't remember a time when a campaign manager of any party had to deal with something as explosive as this in the middle of a campaign that played entirely against type, was counterintuitive to the narrative of the candidate, and so on. Give us a little bit of the TikTok from your point of view on this.
Sure. Let me start by saying it was fair game for that to come out, right? Like that was a legitimate thing that people had a right to know about. And obviously I would have loved if that had not happened, but it was, at no point did we say, oh, this is dirty pool or something, right? Like this was something that the Prime Minister had done, and he had to take ownership of it. I would disagree pretty strongly with the characterization of the first apology, but I guess everybody will.
He lied in it, right? He said he'd only done it twice.
Well, so
there's a video that he'd done it multiple times.
So
if it's an important thing for the public to know about the Prime Minister, why didn't their Prime Minister tell them?
So
and you can't lie in the middle of an apology.
But I think part of this is first of all, like this was an incredibly difficult thing to do. If I never again have to stand in front of a room of 200 of the most loyal campaign workers and explain what's about to happen, and have that be the story, I will be a very happy person. I mean, it was a devastating thing to go through, and you could see the emotions playing off of people, and ranging from obviously extreme disappointment to anger to shame, and to just what happens next, right? And I think in light of that, on a personal level, the way the team reacted to it and sprung into action and got the job done was, something, an inspiring thing that comes out of it. To what Hamish was just saying, though, I think part of the reason this didn't end up being the single thing of this campaign is I think to a certain extent it did play against type. It did. I mean, I think it did cause people to say, "Do I think Justin Trudeau is racist?" And the answer was no. And it was a terrible lack of judgment. He said it himself. He said it was stupid and wrong and all those things, but I don't think it spoke to somebody who was like, oh, he secretly is racist on this front. And I think it got some people overplayed that moment and tried to attack the apologies, to attack the fallout that was coming next. And I think it does play to that idea that there are people who are always going to hate the leader of the other parties, right? And we went through it a lot in the aughts with Harper. One of the reasons the Liberal Party had such trouble getting traction in 08 and 11 was that we assumed everybody hated Stephen Harper as much as we did. And we assumed that our worst version of him was the one that everybody else shared, and that what we had to do to win was convey that hatred as explicitly and loudly as possible, and that would, since everybody hates him, right, that is going to decide who's going to win the campaign, and we forgot about offering something different to it. And it just went too far, right? It just got into a point where people said, well, that's actually not what Stephen Harper is, right? He might be many, many bad things, but he is not the devil incarnate that you're painting him out to be. And we had to learn that lesson through successive campaigns. And I think this time around, that reaction of like, well, he lied to the apology, therefore it's, it's all wrong and you got to pay a price for it. I think it just sort of missed the mark of what people were going through. People were going through a shocking moment, and they were trying to deal with it. And they heard the attacks coming from sort of the conservative side of things. And they're saying, that's not the issue right now. Like, that is not what everybody is dealing with. And that inability to sort of wrestle with it in an honest way minimized the political impact of it to a certain extent.
It's too bad you couldn't have bought insurance against an event like that, because I know an American in Regina who could have sold you a good policy. Sorry, Hamish. What, too soon? Too soon? Come on. Yeah. I want to go to what was perhaps the defining moment in this campaign, and disagree with me on this analysis if you wish. But it sure seemed to me that the numbers really did not move in any substantial way from the beginning of the campaign or even pre-campaign right up until the debates. And starting with the first debate, which was TVA in French, and then of course the commission debates, the English and French debates, where Jagmeet clearly turned his fortunes around in a matter of 35 minutes, if you added up the time that he had there, which is an extraordinary accomplishment. Let's just talk generally about debates. I mean, the commission was set up initially to make sure that there was going to be a debate as much as possible. They haven't decided whether they should continue or not. I mean, it was an experiment by the well, that's in their final report, right? They've got to decide whether they're going to.
I think the government said they were going to do it again. I thought maybe I'm wrong.
What?
The commission still exists.
Yeah. I mean, I suspect they are. But let me just get your sense of, first of all, how important the debates were for all of your parties during that period. And secondly, just sort of a general riff on debates. Should there be more? Should there be fewer? Should there just be a commission debate? Obviously, it depends where you sit, right? Where you stand depends on where you sit. And if you sit on the opposition benches, you want more. If you sit on the government benches, you want less. I get that. But where's the sweet spot in all of this? And Hamish, let me start with you.
Look, we agreed to more debates than actually ended up happening. Happy to do more debates. That's something that obviously I think oppositions are more inclined to agree to than governments. I think the fact that there were other organizations willing to put on national debates, some with national television partners, others from credible organizations like the Monk debates, shows that there is without a commission, there would still be debates. The idea that there wouldn't be any debates is ridiculous. In 2015, there were 5 debates without a commission. So we can do that without a commission coming in. And the problem with what the commission did is that everybody got in on it. I mean, the consortium of everybody was in. It just became the old consortium again that everybody ended up participating in, and was probably virtually indistinguishable from what would have been a traditional consortium debate, except for with more bureaucracy. So
it sort of reminded me of what Twitter would be like if it was a TV show.
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
everybody
yelling loudly.
And 5 moderators. I actually thought the way the French consortium debate, the actual format was pretty good. Yeah. We can talk about formats for debates, and everybody. One of my great frustrations being in some of those debate negotiation meetings is that every time you go to one of these things, the producers all come in with their new brilliant new format that will solve debates. And like, you know, where there's been in this country between the provincial elections and the federal elections, there's got to have been, I don't know, 100 leaders debates this century. Like, there's got to be one or two of those formats that everybody agrees is pretty good. Let's just pick that and stick with that. But on the whole, I found the consortium process extremely frustrating. The meetings were ridiculous. It was the one time that I think us and the Liberals were on the same side. I remember Katie Purchase and I looking at each other when they came up with some outrageous proposal where their original plan was to have just have the leaders with this huge crowd of obscured faces right behind them. It was this very complicated thing, and everybody was like, "What?" It was just very bureaucratic and complicated. Whereas the TVA debate or the Maclean's City TV debate was very simple because they just said, "This is what we're going to do," and there wasn't negotiations at every stage. It made life much easier. But look, I think debates are good. I think debates are an opportunity for Canadians to get to know, especially new leaders. I think they matter. They can matter a great deal. I don't think the English. Ultimately, I don't think the English and French consortium debates really moved the bar at all. Yes, Mr. Singh, I think, had good performances in both, and the NDP went up in the polls a bit. They came back down by the time of Election Day, so ultimately it ended up more or less where they started. The French, the TVA debate definitely has had an impact. Obviously, the bloc took off, hurt us. We lost a couple of seats to the bloc and lost the ability to pick up a bunch more. You know, Liberals lost 6 or 7 seats to them as well. NDP lost a whole bunch. So it really was a vehicle for making Yves-François Blanchet a superstar in Quebec, and he did well with it. So that was, I think, the only thing that really moved the logjam between the polls at the beginning and the polls at the end of the campaign.
Well, and probably because the rise of Blanchet probably denied a majority. So I think that it was significant that way. But Jeremy, your sense of it?
So a couple thoughts on it. I mean, first of all, the commission was set up to address what happened in 2015, specifically, which was the incumbent cherry-picking niche debates with limited broad, without the broad reach, and effectively jamming the hands of the other parties, right? We had no choice in 2015. We had to do the ones that the Prime Minister chose to do, and that did not include broad-based, an experience that the vast majority of Canadians would be able to participate in. And I think in that sense, the commission was a good thing, and I think it would be a shame if the takeaway was, but because I disagree with the production and the choices that were made on the sort of the broadcast
All right,
side
well, I'll
of it.
disagree with something else then.
Well, just a minute. And so on that front, I think it was good, and I think it was a chance for everybody to have a look at it. I would say, I would also say, in terms of the actual impact this time, I think 2 things. One was that TVA debate was critical in the fall of the Conservatives in Quebec and the rise of the Bloc. It did have an impact on us, but it also, from a here's the insider point on this one was, we started to see that the math wasn't going to be there for the Conservatives, and that changed our game plan from the rest of the way. That we could see that there was no longer a path to majority for the Conservatives, and that in fact there was a very, very limited window for a path towards the most seats. And that was something that we were able to react to and make resource allocation decisions around on that end. And I think the other thing was that, in the English language debate, everybody does sort of dial groups on these debates as they're going on, right? You get the instant reaction from the rooms. And when Andrew Scheer opened up with sort of the blistering attack on Trudeau, we saw the lines drop and they never recovered as we saw it. And an impression was formed. And that's kind of one of the things that happens in debates, right? It's a chance for people to see leaders in a long form moment. It's like the essay question as opposed to the multiple choice round. And in that sense, because it was a broad-based audience, that was a defining moment on that front. I do think that there's all sorts of production choices that could be done differently. I know that the commission has mused about maybe there needs to be a debate with just the people who are actually running for Prime Minister, and maybe that is something that is worth considering. And I think there are lots of different ways to play this out. But I would find my final point would just be. People consume politics in a lot of different ways. And for some people, a debate is critically important. But there are other people who say, what the hell does the debate have to do with how somebody's going to govern? It's a debate, right? It's not a, let's sit them down and see how they make a complicated decision, right? Like, I mean, it doesn't tell the whole story. And we could spend 40 days doing 40 debates. But I then think that people will be denied a different type of engagement with parties. Like there are all sorts of ways that people end up interacting with the parties, interacting with their candidates. And the leaders' debates are great for the national networks. They're great for that top line message, but you know, there is a right number in there. I'm not sure if it's 3 or 5 or what it might be. But I think that the first steps on this, while we could quibble with the format on the English language debate, which is really what people are often talking about when they say it was a disaster, the French language commission debate was an exercise in how you run a debate, right? Like, it was great. So if that could have been done on the English side, and maybe next time it will be, and with that size of audience, that's a good thing.
So as somebody who spent 45 years in networks in this country, I'm shocked, I tell you, that both Hamish and yourself are saying that networks operate in their own narrow self-interest and don't give a damn for the people. I don't know what goes on upstairs. I just play the piano. So I imagine your answer to the debates is, yeah, loved them, let's keep on having them, right? Because that really made a difference for you guys.
Well, for this campaign, there's no question debates were more important for us than certainly for any campaign I'd ever worked on before. And the main reason there's 2 reasons for that. Number one was what a low-resource campaign we were. We didn't have any money to put Jagmeet into the living rooms of Canadians so they could actually meet him, which is the second piece, is how unknown he was going into the campaign. And what people did know about him and heard about him up until the campaign started was not necessarily favorable. So the debates for us were, our whole strategy on the debate for Canada beat Jagmeet. That was it, not stiff the Liberals or make sure you do this. It's Canada meet Jagmeet. That was our strategy going in. And at the end of the day, it was successful, and we were quite pleased with it. I don't believe you should have endless debates either. There are other things you need to do on campaigns, and I don't think people have the amount of time and energy that a campaign has to dedicate for debates is quite extensive, and it does distract. I don't know what the right number is. A couple other things this time around. I learned that just because every other leader's going doesn't mean you have to, which we all thought was, oh my God, could you imagine if everybody says yes and we say no? And when you get asked to a debate, the first thing they tell you is, oh, everybody's coming. So what you try to do is you try to get on the phone to everybody and say, are you going? So, you know, we do actually talk to each other sometimes. So if people organizing debates, remember that. Yeah. The commission, I thought was an unmitigated disaster. I have no idea what those people were paid to do. At the end of the day, they turned they did what everybody else does, and they turned it over to the network, to the consortium, and said, you figure it out. I went to one meeting, and I said, I'm not going back. Sorry.
No. I only went to one, and then I started seeing other people too.
No, I mean, the answer to any suggestion that you put forward was, well, we're journalists. Okay. Well, so that was it. That was the answer.
Yeah.
The commission contortions that they went through to put Maxime Bernier on that stage were unbelievable.
Absolutely.
We're going to do 5 riding polls, and we're going to ask, okay, if the world was ending tomorrow and Maxime Bernier was the only guy that could save it, would you think about voting for him? And if 20% or less, 15 to 20% people said yes to that question, he is a legitimate candidate to debate to be Prime Minister of Canada. I mean, it was absurd. So I don't know what value they brought. I honestly don't. I don't know any of the people. They're probably very nice people. They probably worked very hard to try to deliver what it is they were asked to. But I have no idea what value they brought to the process, and I certainly wouldn't renew it. I don't think it's
Well, no, but we also shouldn't. I mean, the Bernier point's a very good one. We were explicitly told by Liberal staffers, we designed this system to screw you to get Bernier in the debates. We had Bernier in all of our practice debates, and people say, well, Bernier's not going to get in, his polling too low, he's not going to say. My assumption has always been the system's been designed, you've been explicitly told by people who work for you that this is designed in order to get Bernier in the debates, and then people were shocked when the system, which is designed to have an outcome, had
Let's
that outcome.
test the veracity of that theory to the man who would have conducted it.
I feel that's one of those cases of those who know don't say, and those who say don't know. That was not the point of the debates. I would say, back to your very first question, I think both of your leaders had good moments by attacking Bernier. I think that was a moment. I think when we look and say, hey, what's a good thing that came out of this campaign is the utter destruction of the People's Party and Maxime Bernier. I think it helped that he had his pants pulled down in front of all of Canada, right? Like I think he got exposed. Now I'm not saying it was not our call to have him there, but I think in that marketplace of ideas and the disinfected the sunshine, he got killed, and that was generally a good thing that he did not do well in this campaign.
The people that he is dangerous talking to, they didn't see him with his pants down. They saw him up there talking about how they saw him exactly how they want and felt empowered by it. So I don't agree that putting him up there to embarrass him. He was up there, and there was a group of Canadians who were empowered by seeing on national television a guy standing up there and spouting what he spouted. Well, and I think the commission should be embarrassed for putting him up there.
Well, and I am not defending anybody in this, but I am saying that one of the reasons was in a time crunch, the question was, do we leave this up to a judge or do we come to a conclusion with everybody else? You could have said the right decision was throw it to the courts and let the courts decide, because that's where it was going. Bernier was launching action in the courts. And that's why those pollsters did what they did, because that was the litmus test of the three things that you needed to have to be on the stage. So again, I'm not defending it, but I'm just putting it in context that, as so often happens now, you have to decide, do we want to throw this to an unelected judge, or do we want to take responsibility within the system for this? I want to take a bit of a turn, though, from the past, although I've still got some questions I want to ask about the past. But I want to move it a little bit to where we're going next. And let me throw out a couple of things just to chew on here. We came and nowhere near the American experience on this, but because of the emergence of social conservatism as an issue in this campaign on particular issues, it did bring up the question of, we had two Catholics and a Sikh. It sounds like the beginning of a joke, but we did, had two Catholics and a Sikh, and all with their own particular definition of what they believed and what their moral values and compasses were and so on. We haven't in this country, to any great degree, unless you go back to the 1800s, had political decisions made strictly on faith-based questions. We seem to bump up against that in this one. Are we getting dangerously close to that line again? And it's not just the traditional ones. I'm talking about now that we've got dozens of religions in this country that we did not have 50 years ago or 60 years ago.
So I think it's fascinating that we have never had an avowed atheist or even agnostic seriously run for the leadership, to be the leader or to be the leader of our country.
None that we know.
I said avowed.
Yes. Okay. Good.
Yeah. And I think that's fascinating. And the fact of the matter is that most Canadians have some degree of faith to whatever extent that is, and it's going to vary extremely widely. And I think it would be sad to get to a point where that's seen as a bar, as opposed to something that's entirely normal, and that the ability for people to separate the dogma of their religion from their priorities while governing is, I think, extremely important, and it's something that has, look, we've obviously wrestled with it in the past. It's been an election issue in the past. I don't think this election was particularly more or less of that. I mean, I think back to the 2000 election with Stockwell Day. It was obviously a big part of the conversation then. We'll see where that goes going forward, but I think getting to a point where everybody has to sort of wash their hands of their religion before they can run for prime minister would be sad for the country.
Yeah, and I guess I want to put it more in the context of where is the new moral standards here? Because if we said in the past that moral standards were part and parcel of what you believed in terms of your own faith, but we seem to have moved to a different thing. And Jeremy, you brought it up, that one of the big things for the Liberal campaign was the recognition that you were fighting not just Andrew Scheer, but fighting social conservatism, which has, around it, a certain fundamentalist attitude and so on. When you decided how you were going to move and attack that, were you conscious at all or worried at all about these very questions about faith and morality and all these things that generally play absolutely no role in politics at all?
First of all, I think it is totally legitimate to say if you're going to put out your religious faith as something that's a defining characteristic of you, and that the tenets of that religion come square against some settled policy in this country, to say which is going to dominate if you were to be elected. Are you going to uphold the law on these factions, or are you going to try to change it? That's a fair question, and that's not saying someone of faith can't be prime minister or can't run for prime minister. In fact, perhaps that's a path to becoming prime minister, but it is a fair question for people to ask. And look, these questions aren't going away. Like, as long as these debates are going on in the States, people are going to be concerned about a retrenchment on a woman's right to choose, a retrenchment on marriage equality, pick your issues. And what we were running up against was, I would disagree a bit, Tom, wasn't like running against social conservatism. We were running against sort of an apathy that people said, that's not a real issue, right? That's been settled. And we said, look, you've got a situation here where you got somebody saying, I'm going to empower my backbench MPs to have free votes on private members' business. But don't worry, I'm not going to reopen this issue, but I'm actually going to have no conditions on my candidates who are running for office to not reopen this issue through private members' bills. One of those things is going to go, right? Like, something is going to give here. And we took a lot of heat as a party by saying that our candidates had to say up front that they were going to defend a woman's right to choose and they were going to defend equal marriage in this country. And that meant that they were pledging not to bring in private members' bills on these things, that they were pledging how they would vote if those things were threatened. People didn't like that in some cases, but it made it very clear where we stood on that front, and people couldn't question it. This was not the case for what we viewed coming out of the opposition, and we thought it was fair game to say, are you going to allow your team, your caucus, which has a lot of very strong pro-life, social conservative people running, are you going to let them carry the day on these issues? And if that isn't an issue that is worth discussing in an election campaign, then I don't know what is, right? Like, that's one of the choices of governing. And a lot of your former colleagues, Tom, told us it's not an issue. A lot of Canadians disagreed about that, and they thought it was an issue, and they responded to it. And then I think, quite frankly, they were right to respond to it, because I think it was a real deal.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between religion and social conservatism, and I come from a party that is absolutely steeped in religion. I mean, Jagmeet Singh is not our first religious leader. Tommy Douglas, J.S. Woodsworth, Stanley Knowles, Bill Blakey, these were all ordained ministers or priests. And that's the history of the party that we come from. And remember Jack Layton in our caucus, our federal caucus, when the vote on same-sex marriage came up. And we had members who wanted to vote on conscience against it. And Jack said, this isn't a matter of conscience, this is a matter of human rights. You will vote the party line. And that was the end of the debate, and done. And so I think it's dangerous to talk about it in terms of a religious piece, although I do agree with you. There are religions that are more socially conservative than others, but there's a difference. And I agree. I think it's a valid question. I mean, it was one that, quite frankly, on Vancouver Island, probably saved us 5 seats when Elizabeth May announced that she would not stop her MPPs elected from reopening the debate on a woman's right to choose. And we made sure that every progressive voter on Vancouver Island knew that was her position. And we thought it was valid. We thought that people should know more about her. But yeah, I do think it's fair game. But I think it has to be done in a respectful way and not just simply manipulated. And I think that one of the hard parts, and I'll end on this, because we went through a bit of this debate in Ontario around the changes to sex education, where people were organizing religiously. And everybody who opposes things like that are not cavemen, Cro-Magnon, evil people. And we can sometimes fall into that trap. And trying to find a way to have a respectful discussion and a respectful debate becomes very important. And I'm not sure we saw that in this campaign. I don't think it was respectful. I think it was more of a gotcha, more of an opportunity to score political points.
I'm conscious of the time, so I'm going to just do an individual question to Hamish, because I've been dying to ask you. And then I do want to throw the discussion open to all of you. Polling, and it actually sort of forms part of a larger question that I've got.
I wish we could afford it.
Yeah, well, yeah. Mike, that's where you pay somebody to go out and ask questions, and then, yeah, I'll explain it to you later.
You see me at the subway stops every morning.
In the last week of the campaign, you did something that to me was quite curious. And you had your leader talking about a constitutional issue of them's that gets the most seats gets to govern. And two things about that. I wondered, you know, that's the very sort of thing that the Liberals and the NDP were hoping you might say, because it drives their vote harder. It sort of bucks up their spine a little bit to say, you know, if you're already declaring victory or close to it, then we've got to get out there and vote. So that was a curious part. The other thing was, were you just getting bad numbers at that point? I mean, no, you weren't even close to having the most number of seats.
Well, two things on that. First of all, we found that that there was great value in talking about a coalition. When we talked about a coalition, it did two things. One, it drove a chunk of blue Liberals to us. It also drove a chunk of Green NDP Liberal switchers to the Liberals, to the NDPs and the Greens, who believed that they could then vote for their party who was their first choice, not just the one they had to hold their nose to vote for, and still have a voice in government. We also knew that there would be a obvious Liberal comeback saying, well, you have to elect a Liberal government, and the only way to stop all this is some sort of a Liberal government. Net, we thought it was a plus, especially when Mr. Singh mused about a coalition at some point in the final week, which we found very encouraging. The fact that he backed off of it a day or two later was discouraging, because I think that would have probably helped with a few more votes. But that was a decision. But we also knew it was coming. We also knew that no matter what happened, the Prime Minister, and I can't remember the exact day, I think it was the Monday of the last week, said there's a possibility, there's a strong chance Andrew Scheer could be Prime Minister. We knew that no matter what we did or we were talking about, the final week was going to come down to a hard choice between the Liberals saying we're the only way to stop the evil Tories and us saying we're the only way to get rid of Justin Trudeau. So we knew we had to talk about governing and what that meant as the final choice.
But in that last week,
I'm going to get to the numbers.
Did you know at that point that you were going to be hitting the lower end of your expectations?
So let me get to that. The other thing we found, and it's available in the publicly available poll, and you can see it in the Angus Reid numbers in our private post-election polling has confirmed it, is that our vote decided early, and I think it'll be fascinating to go back when all the advanced polls are done, and we'll find out that how much we were leading in a lot of seats in the advanced polls. But in the last 3 days, we found that amongst people in Ontario, for instance, who were trying to decide between Tories and Liberals, 51% of those deciders made up their mind in the last 3 days. Mm-hmm. And they absolutely won those last 3 days. We were winning the weeks before. Not by enough, but we were doing okay. But those last 3 days, it cut against us, and a good chunk of NDP Liberal switchers switched. 57% in the last 6 or 7 days in Ontario switched from who were Liberal NDP switchers decided to go Liberal, or 57% made up their mind in the last few days, and amongst them, 68 decided to vote Liberal, 27 NDP. And that helped us in a seat like Essex, which we won off the NDP, but it obviously hurt us in a whole bunch of other seats. So our polling had stopped at the end of the previous week. There's no point in polling in the last weekend when you can't change anything. It's just knowing, which is gratifying, but not particularly. But we could see what we knew in our last poll, which was concerning, was that in the lead up in the previous sort of 2 weeks, when we asked people how likely you are to vote, Conservative voters versus Liberal voters in our target seats, Conservative voters were 10, 12 points more likely to say they were 100% for sure going to vote. And then in the final poll that we got just before that last weekend, the Liberal number had tied. The Liberal enthusiasm had come up in that last week, and that's ultimately how they won. They absolutely crushed in the last 3 days. That enthusiasm, the turnout was higher than we expected. Turnout was 67%, which I don't think is remarked on. It's an extraordinary number. 18.2 million people voted, which is, as much as after the advanced polls, which were higher, we thought we'd get maybe 17.6, 17.5 million people voting. More people voted than expected. And in Ontario, and to a lesser extent Quebec, they broke Liberal in a big way. They broke, frankly, bigger for us than we expected for us in Alberta and Saskatchewan, but that maybe got us one more seat.
Jeremy, very briefly, because I do want to get to some questions here.
Yeah.
When did you know you were going to win?
I was told, Tom, there would be no math. No, I think, look, one of the impacts of what you were just describing was to make my head explode over the course of the week, because I was looking at the numbers and I did not see what you just described. And so it was a great tactic if it was meant to really have me questioning my sanity, because it really was it made us start to think, are our numbers all wrong? And I don't think that they were at the end of the day. I think that a couple of key things happened. One was the Tory platform came out on the Friday before the Thanksgiving weekend, and that was a really tangible proof of the story that we were telling, right? Which was that you're making promises, you're promising a balanced budget, there's got to be cuts. And the cuts were articulated in the platform, and they had to be articulated in the platform because we had made available the PBO to cost platforms.
Which you didn't use.
And we absolutely used. And
for 19 of your 44 promises.
Yeah, but the point is you couldn't get away with not describing the cuts and say that you had the balanced budget. And so that really put the wind in the sails of the message that we were trying to sell. And then it was combined with, inexplicably, we heard the Tories delivering our message, which was Andrew Scheer can win this election campaign. And those two things galvanized something for us in the last week. And combined with something that wasn't sort of a short-term development, it was combined with a 10-year program in the Liberal Party to rebuild our field operation. In 2011, we did not have the capacity to do field work in this country. If we weren't paying for paid phone calls, we really just weren't doing that hard, basic work of politics, knocking on somebody's door, identifying the vote, and then getting that vote out. And in 2011, in an existential moment, the Liberal Party said, maybe we should start doing things differently. We threw the party open, we got rid of membership fees, we invited basically a takeover of the party, and we got enthusiasm up, and we put a lot of time and effort and money into volunteer recruitment and training and retention. And it's very easy to come into these these things and talk about the great advances in the digital stuff, and we did this on MySpace. It's wonderful. But at the end of the day, the big difference for us was that by 2019, the hard work that we started in 2011, and that quite frankly Justin Trudeau really championed, paid off. We had the army to deliver the votes in the crucial swing areas at the right time. And that was something that we couldn't just invent at the last moment to capitalize on the momentum. And so that's the hard work of politics, right? That's 10 years to get to that moment.
Yeah, we're 5 years behind you on that.
Let me, anybody want to join? Oh, there's a few hands going up, not a surprise. Right, yes, sir.
Two questions.
There's the microphone.
First one involves a story that was in one of the major papers about a week ago, and it suggested that one of the big things that caused the switch at the very end was Obama's endorsement of Trudeau, and that went a long way to dealing with the questions of racism. So I'm asking, I guess that's to you, Jeremy. What do you think? Is there any truth to that? And the second question is, to what effect do you think that Ford had an effect on the result, especially in Ontario?
I guess I'll start. So, I mean, one of the things I saw the Obama story as well, and I will say, you know, in the old, you know, victory has 1,000 parents and defeat is an orphan. Each of those 1,000 parents also has like a thing that they think that they did that really made the crucial difference. I changed up what we were serving in Campaign HQ. I started spending less on lunch, which encouraged people to go out and start knocking on doors rather than hang around the headquarters office. I think that was a really pivotal moment. But obviously, look, the Obama endorsement was a big deal, but it was a big deal in the sense that it just sort of reassured people, right? There were questions that were emerging, like, am I crazy for thinking that I'm going to give the Liberals another shot here? And a guy that has has approval ratings in this country that any politician in this country would die for, came out and said, yeah, this is the right move. And so that definitely helps. And that's part of that sort of brew in those last 10 days or so that gave people the confidence to say, you know, to cast a vote for the Liberals.
Hamish, I just wanted to quickly deal with the second part of that question about Doug Ford, but can you confirm or deny to us that it was in this very building in the basement where you held Doug Ford all those weeks? And if so, did you feed him and exercise him regularly?
Look, you know, Mr. Ford in May said he wasn't going to campaign in the federal election.
You just helped him.
We respected that. In my experience, Doug Ford doesn't do what I tell him to do. He'll do what he's going to do. So we respected his decision, and that's what he's decided to do. You know, whether he had an effect on the results or not, I think there's been some public post-election polling around that. I think it's one of the things. You know, as Jeremy said, everything can contribute to an election result. I don't know how to quantify it exactly.
Okay.
A couple of things. On the Doug Ford piece, I think there's no question he had an impact on the election. I think one of the things, and I'd actually be interested to hear Hamish's response on this, but I think particularly in Ontario, I think what drove the Greens and NDP voters that Hamish talked about to the Liberals in the final days, I think were two things. One was Doug Ford, and there's no question that they were able to play up that fear of Doug Ford and a federal conservative government, and that basically that was the first sign of the apocalypse was coming. So that was successfully done. But there's another piece that I think was important as well, and the Liberals played this very, very well, and it was climate. It was climate. And the Liberals had a mantra through the last 5 days. Like, we may have the worst climate plan of the three parties other than the Conservatives, but they're not going to win. So you actually only have two climate plans you get to choose from. Our weak one or their nothing one. And that was I'm not saying it's true, but that was the mantra.
Right.
Is that there was only two choices on climate, us or these guys. And I think those were two things, particularly in Ontario, that helped drive a lot of folks out of our camp, out of the Green camp, and into the Liberal camp in the final days. They became very galvanizing reasons why you had to stop Andrew Scheer. They became very galvanizing reasons for those left of center voters. And I think there's feel free to take my advice or not, but I think some of the ideas that, and I watch the Conservatives, I don't see a lot of effort to grow the support. I think I think people had a notion that we're over here, particularly on climate, on carbon pricing. If that's where you're at, we're your choice. These other three guys are going to fight it out on that side. Vote's going to split. We don't really need to grow. We just need to really motivate our voters, get them out there. And that didn't work this time. And I think that there's a bit of a rethink we all need to do about you know, do you need to grow your vote, or is it just about, you see this in the US in spades. I mean, that is all US politics is now, is don't reach out, don't try to convince anybody, just jack your people through the roof. And I think that that's something we as strategists all have to think about, and that's one of the things that I came away from this campaign kind of looking at and visiting and thinking about what does that mean. And it's all of us, it's not just the Conservatives. I mean, we New Democrats are in the same spot on that, so something we need to think about. And I'm not going to comment on Obama because I don't want to gas all those years of respect I had for him.
I think you just did. I know that there are, just for the sake of balance, are there any women who would like to participate in this conversation? Please. Yes, ma'am. Your microphone's on your way. Hang on a second.
My question's very simple. Your question never got answered about Scheer and the position he took about the number of votes. If he got most of the votes, he should be declared the Prime Minister. And you didn't really answer that question. What was the motivation behind that? And did that really create a problem? Like, do you think people had a negative reaction to that?
Well, no, he was asked about what would happen if you got slightly more seats. It came up in a couple of questions. I think it was in one of the sit-down interviews, if I remember correctly. And he answered the answer which has been the case since the war, which is in every time in this country, the party with the most seats has always got the chance to govern. It's happened in the 4 times it's happened in modern Canadian history. So that he was asked a question, and you know, sometimes he's a former Speaker of the House. He's very up on constitutional precedent and things. And when he gets asked a poli-sci question, sometimes he gives a poli-sci answer as opposed to
very diplomatic.
Bridging on to talk about, you know, liberal high taxes or something. But you know, he answered that that's what would happen, and that if we had won the most seats, we should get the first shot at governing. But that was in the context. I don't believe that. You know, I think your point about people seeing that we could win definitely helped stampede a whole bunch of his voters to you and motivated some of your voters. There's no question about that. I think that's obviously why you had the Prime Minister do it a week before Election Day. So it was in the context of a whole discussion of a whole week around that. So I don't think that that interview answer or whatever it was in and of itself particularly telling one way or the other. I think it was in the context of the whole. If it had been on its own in a week where everybody was talking about something entirely different, it would have stood out more. But I think in the context it was a week where it really was Tory, you know, can the Tories win, can the Liberals win? Those are the choices. In the context of that, I don't think it stands out.
Jeremy, your silence indicates total agreement with Hamish.
Well, I think I sort of talked about the impact on it from our side of things. And maybe I'll just pick up on the climate point as well and just say, like, I mean, one of the things about this campaign in that final week as well is it did become clear that having a serious approach on climate change was becoming table stakes policy in Canada in federal election campaigns. It's up there with, you know, what is your healthcare position? What is your position on national unity? We'll see if that holds true. Like, we'll see if, you know, it takes more than one election to have a trend. But it does seem like that it is a pivotal thing that you can no longer appeal to a broad base of Canadians, or the broadest possible base of Canadians without a credible climate change plan. And I think that was in that mix as well, and was part of that closing message.
My understanding is from the organizers that the hall is rented out for a wedding, which comes in the next 15 minutes.
I do.
Yeah. But seriously, the bar remains open. The panelists are going to be here. And I just wanted to thank each of you, not only for participating this evening and being as open and as thoughtful as you were, but I will just throw in my 2 cents worth, having been around perhaps more campaigns than all of you combined. Well,
Combined?
I don't know. I mean, 1972 was a long time ago. It is heartening when you take a look at the people who are involved. This is a little message for me now. When you look at the people who are involved in all three of our major parties, the quality of the people who are attracted to this public engagement is the very thing that, despite the negatives of a campaign that you may not have liked or an outcome that didn't please you, nevertheless, when you take a look at the quality of the people here and the people who were behind them, it is a very reassuring thing to know that at this stage, when the rest of the world's democracies are going through some horrendous moments, that we're still pretty okay, you know? And I think that's the takeaway for me from all of this. So Jeremy, Hamish, Michael, thank you all very much, and have a drink.
Thank you very much. That was greatly appreciated. You know, you don't have to do this and come out and have an open discussion with the people you just fought a campaign against and talk through the matters and what happened. So I appreciate your frankness, and I think that has paid dividends in what is a great event. So I'll just tell you quickly that we have one event that I want to highlight for you. December 13th, we're giving out our inaugural Nation Builder of the Year award. That is going to the Toronto Raptors. Masai Ujiri has agreed to come out and accept that award. So that should be a real special event. There's a number of others that you can find on our website. Please take a look at them. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.